Hello, welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is November 17th, 2022. I'm Harley Schlanger. And Helga, this last week, we seem to have, last couple of days, dodged a potential nuclear bullet with this incident in Poland. I'm not sure yet how most people realize how serious this is, but I think it'd be very important for you to give people your sense of what happened with this.
Well, I think, we should really all study this incident because it shows how rapidly, because of stupidity, provocations, overreactions, combination of all of these, we can go into a situation where, you have a full-fledged NATO-Russia confrontation, because that's what was on the verge of happening. There was the news, I think it was Tuesday, that a missile had hit some location in Poland, and immediately you had a whole array of media and some politicians who were saying this was a Russian attack on Poland, therefore NATO member. People even started to talk about NATO Article 5, meaning the defense condition where all of NATO would have been coming to the defense of Poland. Some of the media, especially the British media, the Daily Telegraph, the Mail, they were going haywire, talking about a Russian attack against Poland. Bild Zeitung and several German media were going absolutely crazy by saying, headlines like Putin is playing with World War III. This was the headlines on Wednesday, and also an editorial. And that despite the fact that already on Tuesday evening, with the time difference, naturally, President Biden had said very clearly that there was no evidence that this was a Russian missile, but that the suspicion was that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile, which one way or another had ended up in Poland. So despite the fact that the President of the United States and then subsequently the Pentagon denied that that was a Russian missile, the media put still headlines, and even in the morning of Wednesday, they were reporting this. And actually, Zelensky and Kuleba, they were insisting all day long that it was absolutely a Russian missile. And when it was said very clearly it was not a Russian missile, then Kuleba said that it was a conspiracy theory to say that. Now, this is incredible. But then, that is all in one sense understandable. Ukraine is one thing. But then you had these Western politicians, like from the German Liberal Party, the FDP, Strack-Zimmermann, the woman who is the chairman of the Defense Committee, and Lambsdorff. They all were basically saying that there was no question that this was a Russian missile. So what these people were talking up, is the potential of a NATO-Russia military confrontation in this extremely tense situation, and that shows you that, I mean, they were not asking, do we have the evidence? Has it been verified? Do we know? They didn't ask for an investigation, but they were just jumping to the conclusion, blaming Russia. Now, I think this has to be analyzed, because this just shows you that under times of, accidental, events, or, things which can go wrong, if we do not move in a different direction and develop a security architecture where such potential, annihilation of mankind can be prevented, I think that this should be really the warning shot for anybody who is not a complete moron, that we definitely need to go in the direction of what the Schiller Institute has been saying since April of this year, that we do need a new international security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet, based on the principles of the Peace of Westphalia. Now, I think that now in the aftermath, naturally, there are calls for a thorough investigation. There are some voices now even talking that it may have been a provocation. There are politicians inside Poland even who say that Warsaw has to completely rethink its strategy in respect to Ukraine. So I'm not in a position now to answer these questions because obviously this is of the highest importance, and one has to be extremely thorough in finding out what exactly happened. Now it was probably, that's what all signs are speaking for, a Soviet-produced Russian missile, which is used by Ukraine. So, but who shot this missile, and was it an accident? Was it a provocation? That remains to be seen. But I think the behavior of the politicians is really absolutely scandalous. And those media who were lying, despite the fact that, from the president of the United States, it had already been debunked. I think people should really throw these newspapers away, and really recognize how dangerous they are as a tool of, geopolitical warfare.
Once it became clear that it wasn't a Russian fired missile, it's interesting how the discussion continued, though. You had Stoltenberg saying, well, it's still Russia's fault. You had this crazy Ann Applebaum from the Atlantic Council saying, it makes no difference what happened, it's Russia's fault. And then you had a further shift into this argument that we now need to spend more money for Ukraine. They need a better air defense system. I mean, Helga, you have a Schiller Institute conference coming up on November 22nd, which really takes on greater importance now as a result of this incident, doesn't it?
Yes, because it just shows that we are really, as we discussed at the last Schiller conference, where this extremely important short video was shown, what actually would happen under conditions of a nuclear war. That that once this thing is triggered, you have maximum 10 minutes, or absolute maximum 10 to 15 minutes before an attack is announced, and the basically hitting of the nuclear arsenal. uh, 2 minutes to identify, 30 seconds for the US president to decide what to do, a few minutes. I mean, if we are getting into this kind of a dynamic, I think people really should have sleepless nights until we have resolved this. So next Tuesday on the 22nd, we have the third Schiller conference coming out of the initiative from Latin American congressmen. This started in October. Then we had very quickly another conference. Now we have the third. And in the meantime, these congressmen, especially two from Mexico, have issued a call, an international call to all elected officials internationally and their constituents to basically, become a new peace movement of world citizen. Because the fact that if you have a nuclear war, it is a matter of mankind as a whole, because it could lead to the complete destruction of all of civilization. And that automatically makes every citizen a world citizen who has the right to stand up and say, this has to stop and we need a different policy. So we will have several parliamentarians from Mexico, I think Peru, Argentina, Brazil, and also some people from Europe, also some of the people demonstrating right now for an end to this war and peace negotiations. So we will have a very important a meeting with two panels, because it's growing very rapidly. We have to take two panels. So I would really urge all of you who are concerned about the danger of nuclear war to participate in this conference, because we have to put very powerfully an alternative on the table, which is exactly what I already mentioned. We have to force the governments of this world to have a new international security architecture, which does not leave out any country. Because if you leave out, you know, even if it's a so-called autocratic state, which is, one could say a lot about that also, everybody has to be taken care of, or it does not function. That is the big lesson of the Peace of Westphalia, where people recognized that you have to take into account the interest of every country for a peace to last. When you don't do that, like it happened in the Versailles Conference, it leads to the next war. I mean, that was the big difference between the Peace of Westphalia and the Versailles Treaty, that the one established international law as a functioning body of lawfulness, and the Versailles Treaty was just the seed for the next major world war to occur. So we will discuss that, and we will also present workable steps to be taken to have such a conference. So you should really participate.
And you can register for it at the schillerinstitute.com. There's a box and a registration form you can fill out. Now, you were mentioning the importance of the motion from Ibero-America, from especially the Global South. It's interesting that this incident in Poland occurred during the G20 conference, where there were clearly tensions between the Global South and these so-called G7 nations. What's your sense of what came from there? Because there were a number of meetings. Xi Jinping was very active. How do you think that conference went overall?
Well, I think it showed several things. I mean, first of all, the developing countries, but especially naturally the host country, Indonesia, they were very concerned that the so-called Western countries would not just come and complain and, harass and attack, but they wanted to have a constructive approach, focusing on the real challenges which are a threat to humanity, which is naturally the world food crisis. Beasley from the World Food Program said this is the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II, what we're experiencing right now. So they succeeded to a very large extent. I mean, actually, there was still an effort to condemn Russia and so forth, but it did not really function, because I think it has dawned on at least the more intelligent people that there is no way how you can go back to the unipolar world. The multipolarity has become a reality. The global south is playing a much bigger role. They want to overcome colonialism in its new form. And I think that is a completely new dynamic. Now, that does not mean that everybody in the Western establishment immediately will adapt to that, because they are arrogant. And if you listen to Joseph Borrell, who thinks only Europe is a garden and the rest is a jungle, you naturally your ears are probably so full of flowers and whatever in your garden is growing that you can hear what people are saying. But the the reality is that there is a new reality, a new realignment, where 130, 140 countries have allied with the Belt and Road Initiative. They're forming new, systems with the BRICS countries. Many more countries are applying to be members of the BRICS: Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey. So there is a lot of motion to build actually a completely new system based on sovereignty, the 5 principles of coexistence, the tradition of the non-aligned movement. And that is really the new dynamic. Now, I think other than that, I think quite important was the first physical meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping, at least since Biden has been president. And according to Wang Yi, this meeting was a breakthrough. You have to see. I'm always of the opinion, let the deeds follow the words. But I think the fact that these two people met for more than 3 hours is very important. And one can only hope that this will constitute a lasting shift towards cooperation and an ending to this extreme confrontation which was going on. Xi Jinping also met with about a dozen or more leaders, with Macron, with Albanese from Australia, with Rutte from Holland, many others, and especially the meeting between Xi Jinping and Macron, re-established intention the two countries should work together. Then you had the Scholz visit to China earlier. So there are clear motions that, there is a recognition that, you don't get around China, because China is the locomotive of the world economy and all the other Asian countries as well. I mean, the only place where it's growth is Asia. It's not Europe. It's not the United States. So it was quite interesting that the Indonesian president, Widodo, proudly announced the opening of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway uh, at the occasion of Indonesia being the host country of the G20. So this is, I think this is important, because I think that developing countries look for cooperation with those countries who bring them real development. They don't want to have, you know, just democracy and Sunday sermons. They want to have development. And I think they go to the countries who bring them that. So in that sense, it would be the best, and that is the whole aim of the Schiller Institute. We want the United States and European nations to cooperate with the global South, and there has to be an equal footing, and the demands from the developing sector that they want to overcome their poverty, it's legitimate. And if Germany and France and Japan and other so-called industrial countries, who almost are formally industrialized countries by now, they have to listen, and they have to come down from their high horse, and they should not think that they are so much superior to everybody else, and that in any case will not be accepted any longer. So I think, with all caution, and the Polish missile event shows you that caution is adequate. Nevertheless, I think this G20 meeting did reflect a change in the realities of the world, and I think that's a little step in the right direction.
Well, the final communique, which was the G7 nations wanted this to be a condemnation of Russia, and it was obviously a compromise. The final communique said most members strongly condemned the war in Ukraine, not even condemning Russia. And it mentioned that there were different views and assessments of the situation and sanctions. So clearly, if it was an attempt in this behind the scenes to bully, it didn't work. Now, Helga, going into this conference, you had a role to play. You were able to bring to full consciousness this whole question of the non-aligned movement, the anti-colonial movement. Why don't you just give us a little sense of what you did?
Yes, I participated in a very interesting conference celebrating the 66-year commemoration of the Bandung, Belgrade, Havana conferences, and really, celebrating a revival of the spirit of Bandung. So this was a very interesting week long conference. It started in Jakarta, it went to Bandung, went to Surabaya, and then from there to Bali. I unfortunately only participated online, but nevertheless, it was really expressing the absolute desire of the developing countries to end colonialism, and I think that spirit was very, very strong. Now, some people naturally also expressed that they think the West is hopeless, that you have to have a unilateral agreement, just don't bother about the West anymore. Now, I have argued many times that I don't think that that is realistic, because if you do not integrate at least the United States and hopefully many European countries, at least the continental European countries, it will not work. First of all, I don't think the West would collapse as peacefully as the Soviet Union disintegrated in 91. And we can't have a block building either. You can't have a global South plus Russia and China and a West which decouples. I don't think that will work. And I find it quite interesting. I just read an interview with Andrei Kortunov from RIAC, the Russian International Affairs Council, who basically said the same thing. He said that he thinks that to construct any kind of world order without the United States will not function. And that's unfortunately, that's what it is. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but we have to find a way of getting the United States, despite what Ray McGovern calls Mitty Mac, Wall Street, the big banks, BlackRock, the whole conglomerate of economic financial interests and the military industrial complex. That is one reality, but that is not the entire United States. I mean, we have farmers, we have people who, are the real people, and they have obviously had a voice in the recent period in the campaign of Diane Sayre, senator candidate for New York. But I think that the last word on the G20 and the non-aligned movement. I think that the momentum is in Asia. I also was able to give several interviews, Chinese TV, commenting on all of these things. So I think, my overall impression of all of that is the Westerners, so-called, would be really advised to stop being so arrogant and just start to cooperate with the countries who clearly have the historic momentum. And if they don't, it will be at their own expense. And in the worst case, Europe will go to the sidelines of history and become a relic, of one of these civilizations who didn't make it. That's not what we should aim for. So I'm more for a revival of the spirit of Leibniz, that Europe and China should work together and develop all the countries in between. So that's my view.
Well, things are all not so good in Joseph Borrell's garden. The latest report from the European Central Bank shows that there is a extreme period of crisis coming with the economy. The idiocy of the Green partners in the German coalition, Baerbock and Habeck, are pointing toward accelerated deindustrialization. What does it look like in Europe right now?
Well, I think we are going into a real hard fall and winter. Uh, the prices of food and energy are already skyrocketing. Füst, who is the head of the IFO Institute in Munich, just said that this is in the medium term risking Germany as an industrial location. Mittelstand will be wiped out if the policies of these green ideologues, these absolutely anti-human, anti-growth people, Habeck and Baerbock, if that is not quickly replaced, Germany will cease to be an industrial nation. And the EZB just put out a report saying, that basically they are behind between a rock and a hard place, between quantitative tightening, threatening collapses and bankruptcies, and quantitative easing, which threatens hyperinflation. There is no solution within that system. This is why we are saying that you absolutely need to have a new credit system, Glass-Steagall, National Bank, going back to the principles as the Bretton Woods system was intended by Franklin D. Roosevelt and unfortunately never implemented, because it was Truman and Churchill who then finally designed the Bretton Woods. This is why many developing countries don't even like the word Bretton Woods, but as Roosevelt intended it, to overcome the poverty and increase the living standard of the entire world population. That has to be put on the agenda. But naturally, I don't think it will function with this present leadership of the EU, because von der Leyen and these people, Lagarde, they are really the hardcore neoliberal, they're like the Honeckers of the neoliberal system. So I think that with them, it will not function. We need some other motion.
Well, and especially given the context of the war danger, as well as the hunger crisis that David Beasley talked about. Maybe you want to say something more about that. But clearly, this question of a failing architecture, which is, as you say, not going to fail peacefully, but could drag the world into war, does raise this question of what your husband dedicated the last 50 years of his life to, which is the creation of a new paradigm. And I think it'd be worthwhile just discussing finally how this would work for the advanced, so-called advanced sector, the bankruptcy reorganization, the credit system. This is something that's not even discussed. We just had an election in the United States, and none of this was discussed. Maybe you want to say something about the lack of a red wave in the United States in this context.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the expectation that the Republicans would take over with a sweeping, victory did not come true. Then, Trump's candidates didn't win in many places. Now the big talk is about DeSantis, who is, really linked to the neoliberal Austrian School of Economics. Right now, I think that the United States, it really shows that what my late husband had said, that the party system does not function, or he called it actually the potty system. And it was George Washington at the end of his term warned against the parties, saying that they tend to be not in the interest of the national interest, but lobby interest, specialist groups. There is really no fundamental difference, because if you now look what Bannon, as an advisor of Trump, is doing in Mexico, lining up with all the extreme right-wing forces of the Latin American continent, I think that I think we need really a revival of the American tradition. And the only thing one could see in this recent election campaign was the fantastic campaign of Diane Sayre, who, however, was completely defrauded of her vote. I mean, that should be also noted. I mean, there's this big story. You can't say that there was vote fraud in 2020. Well, there was vote fraud for sure against Diane Sayre. We have screenshots, where she had at a certain point over 50,000 votes, and then a couple of hours later, the screenshot shows she had only 29,000 votes. She had collected more than 66,000 signatures to even be on the ballot. So they didn't even give her a third of those votes, which is completely hilarious. She had all these groups who were supporting her. In any case, what that signifies is that there is a huge divide between the population and the governments. And that is becoming very clear in Europe as well, where you have more and more large demonstrations, people taking to the streets because they don't feel represented by the government, or parties such as this FDP, who really showed their colors in this missile crisis. I mean, who wants to be in in the hands of people like this Strack Zimmermann? I mean, this is a Halloween kind of an idea. So I think what is really required is that we need a completely different system, whereby the common good is again on the agenda, and that more and more people from the so-called normal people have to take responsibility and qualify themselves to know what should be the economic policy, the foreign policy, the security policy, education. And that requires exactly what we are trying to do, to create a movement of world citizens who basically say, we will not allow our fate to be ruined by those few billionaires who are controlling all the corporations. BlackRock is just one example. Vanguard. These things are like vultures who are trying to suck out the juice out of the economy at the expense of the people. And that has come to a breaking point, and we need really a mass movement of true state citizens. And one occasion where that will be discussed is this coming week at the next Schiller conference. So again, I invite you to participate.
So those people who want to know how there's no contradiction between being a patriot of your nation and a world citizen should register for the conference. It's November 22nd. It's available for your registration at the schillerinstitute.com. Helga, we've run out of time, so thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you hopefully again next week.
Yes, till next week.